Hello there, and welcome back to another video. This is the 8th episode of the story about how Naruto's life changed after the seal shattered. He's been thrust into Anbu, he's losing track of which half of him is him and which half is his demon, he can't seem to find his way back to Team 7, and he's been having these strange dreams, with a sky ripped apart by a broken moon, a man with a staff, and a version of himself with glowing, nine-tomoe eyes. This story is from Slexinski. Make sure to support him, her. Like and subscribe to show your support. Let's get this party started. I've never been to Waterfall, you know, Koga commented, with far more excitement than the situation warranted. Yugao shot an unimpressed look his way. What exactly do you expect to find there? She asked with a snort, flicking stray bangs away from her mask. A magical mountain of gold? Singing quartets? It's not all that different from any other village. I heard they have their own special kind of rice noodle. Koga retorted. It's supposed to be fucking magical. It's a noodle. Doesn't mean it can't be magical. Yamato sighed, looking away. He wanted to scold his team for being so unprofessional, but at this point it was probably a lost cause. The journey to Takigakure was dark, long, and boring. The forestry did a fine job blocking out every small speckle of sunlight, lending a timeless quality to the sojourn that made it impossible to tell what time it was by sight alone. Yamato spent half the time half-heartedly reminding his team this was a real mission, and the other half checking his watch. But if even Yugao was bored enough to humor Koga and argue over the magical state of noodles, then they were in dire straits indeed. The only person who didn't appear bored to tears was Naruto, but even then he seemed too lost in thought to be moved into any kind of emotion. He was also doing a fine job of ignoring his teammates and the situation at hand. He'd never paid much attention to any of the dossiers his team used for missions. If they were all going to be dead anyway, what did he care? Occasionally someone noteworthy would come up, and his interest would be piqued long enough to peruse through their file. But as a whole he never found them useful until now. He knew so much about people he'd never met before that he was having a hard time sorting everything out, lost in his own head as he compiled together everything he knew about the Komiai's Jinchuriki, Fu. The more he learned, the more he wanted to meet her. She was around his age, but all the same he felt protective of her. It seemed her life hadn't been all that easy either, although the last Anbu spy to report on Takigakure suggested that she had a good relationship with the new village leader. Unfortunately there was little to no information on him, a surprise replacement for a father who met an early grave. But he would be integral in this plan going off without a hitch. Are you alright? Yamato asked lightly, stirring the boy out of his thoughts. Fine. Naruto replied tersely, rubbing his forehead behind his mask. This is your first diplomatic mission, being apprehensive is only natural. Yes, and that was the problem, wasn't it? It was only natural to be concerned over a daunting task that Naruto had never encountered before. He wondered how well Kyubi would handle it. Kurama was actually a deft hand at political manipulation. Maybe because he was a deft hand at manipulation, period. How do you do it, Yamato Taishu? He asked, letting out a gusty breath. Yamato might not be the best person to ask, seeing as he was always far too amiable in diplomatic discussions. Everyone has their own way of going about it. He mused. Tsunade-sama tends to be straight and to the point. Sarutobi-sama was kind and understanding but still always held his ground. It may seem counterintuitive, but diplomacy needs to authentic. That does sound counterintuitive. Naruto agreed, baffled. I thought all politicians were misogynist, manipulative, uncompromising jerks. Well, they certainly can be. Yamato chuckled. But not everyone. Speaking for myself, I find that playing the hardliner always ends up backfiring. Yamato Taishu was too nice and moralistic for that, Naruto privately agreed. But you know, Naruto, I have the feeling that you're going to do just fine. Naruto's brow furrowed behind his mask. Really? Well, at least that made one of them. Meanwhile, Yamato studied the blonde carefully, turning over his conversation with Kyubi in his head. Naruto didn't appear to always be conscious of what went on with the fox, as evidenced by his ignorance over the whole Danzo assassination debacle. The blonde was lost in his own thoughts, leaving Yamato to scrutinize him carefully. From behind the mask all he could see were large pools of sparkling blue, a far cry from the monstrous illusion he had seen on their last mission. What was that? A dojutsu? But as far as Yamato knew, Naruto had no Kekkei Genkai to speak of. It was like nothing he had ever seen before, a visage that made all the hairs stand up on the back of his neck, as if in some sort of instinctual response. Kyubi hadn't explained, and Yamato hadn't chased the issue. Maybe it was one of the fox's power. Maybe the fox was telling him something, without words. He doubted Kyubi ever did anything unless it was with the utmost intention, so it couldn't have been a mistake. It had been just a glimpse, a flicker of inhuman eyes meeting his own. And yes, they were alarming, but also somehow familiar. Yamato missed a step, but recovered himself before his team could take notice. Had that been a Sharingan? He had heard that they could manifest into different forms besides the normal three-tomoe shape. If so, then Kyubi was definitely telling him something. He had killed Danzo and he had done it for a reason. Yamato had speculated to Naruto that the fox could have somehow used the connection between the Nine Tails and the Sharingan. This was Kyubi's way of confirming that there was, indeed, a connection. It appeared the fox actually had the Sharingan himself. Or was it really a Sharingan? He had no way of knowing. Yamato continued to study the back of Naruto's head, the blonde obliviously plodding along some ways in front of him. He worried for the blonde, obviously, however, he knew Naruto was capable of handling himself. This fact was getting more and more apparent as the blonde continued to grow exponentially. As self-deprecating as he tended to be, now that he had discarded the blustery, inflated arrogance of his youth, he actually had reason to be arrogant these days. He was growing into his potential more and more each day. He deserved to be jounin, despite what he might personally believe. Not many children his age could rise to the occasion like he had done, not just meeting expectations, but blowing past them. Tsunade trusted him to lead his own missions, to train his own team. He knew it was easier to see all the boys' accomplishments from his vantage as captain, but he was not the only one who acknowledged Naruto's strength, and soon enough the boy would understand. It was both satisfying and yet disheartening to see. The moment Naruto understood his full potential was the moment he would understand just what sort of odds he was up against. Takigakure was small, but pretty. As well-traveled as he was these days, Naruto could wholeheartedly say it was the kind of place you tried to visit at least once in your life, but probably wasn't enough for a repeat trip, if only because it was so small. Naruto hadn't actually seen a waterfall yet, but he had to believe they were around here somewhere. But then, would it really be surprising for a hidden village to have a misleading name? His team was greeted with blatant, dumbfounded stares and a whole grapevine's worth of gossip. Word got around pretty quickly when a village was so small, he supposed, but they hadn't even been here for half an hour. The first thing he noticed about the village aside from its remarkably small size was the disproportional amount of adults to children. In Konoha, they were impossible to get away from, constantly screaming and making a nuisance of themselves at the most inopportune of times. But here in Takigakure there wasn't a single pair of wide eyes staring out at them from behind their parents' legs, no shrieking laughter piercing through the air. Naruto looked to be the youngest person thus far. However, Takigakure certainly earned its mark as a shinobi village. Most of the adults they did meet were jounin rank, and looked quite formidable. Not that anyone was attempting to intimidate them. True to Tsunade's word, it appeared they were in some kind of alliance with Takigakure. Their paperwork went through easily with the ninja at the gates, and thus far they hadn't been met with any opposition. Naruto was in for a surprise when he finally found someone close to his own age, and that person happened to be the leader of Takigakure. He was also more flighty than a scared bird and twice as fearful of the world at large. Yamato managed to get him to calm down easily enough, throwing that disarming smile of his around like a lethal weapon. Now that he wasn't startled, Shibuki actually seemed to be quite a shrewd and level-headed leader. "I know of Akatsuki," the boy leader said, stiffly, once it became the topic of conversation. Yamato arched a brow, motioning for him to continue. "One of our shinobi Kakuzu defected to the organization," he revealed, solemnly. "Aside from what little I know of his defection, I'm afraid I have no other information on them. Our spy networks, in conjunction with Kimogakure, have enough to put together a reliable picture," Yamato replied. "And unfortunately, what we know is nothing good. They operate a small, but incredibly efficient team of missing nin from around the hidden countries. Their motives do not appear to be influenced by political or monetary decisions." Naruto cast a quick side glance at his captain, before averting his eyes back to his tea. It appeared Yamato was not going to reveal all of what they knew, as he had yet to come to the subject of Jinchuriki. But withholding information at this point was probably a perceptive course of action at this point. Despite being peripheral allies, Takigakure's status in the greater scope of hidden village politics was unknown. For all they knew, they could be conspiring with Akatsuki already. Naruto chanced a glance at the young leader in front of them. If they were, he doubted Shibuki was aware of it. The boy had no poker face to speak of, his emotions written clearly on his face as they transitioned with his thoughts. Naruto privately found this very endearing, preferred honest people like that, and personally he thought a village leader should be as honest and candid with their people as possible, but he could see how it could be problematic to be so expressive, or be seen as naive. By his side, his team made no move to add to the conversation. The setting was casual. They were seated across from a low table, a beautiful garden in full view beyond the palace deck. Shibuki had 2 guards stationed by either opening, but was otherwise alone. Naruto wasn't sure if this was a sign of trust or naivety. Politics gave him such a headache, he digressed. And watching Yamato expertly maneuver his way through his part made him antsy over his own part to play in this mission. The ANBU team was here as delegates from Konoha to discuss growing international conflicts and to reaffirm their alliance. Hopefully by conveying the severity of the issue, the Takigakure Kage would be more amenable to strengthening relations with their larger and more economically influential neighbor, and furthermore more amenable to allowing their prized Jinchuriki to train in Konohagakure and participate in the upcoming Chunin exams on a joint team. As far as Naruto could see, Fu was the only eligible ninja in this entire village. It wasn't uncommon practice for smaller nations to shuttle in their unranked Jounin-level ninja along with their genin. A well-known and affluent country like Konoha could never get away with it, but a smaller, more obscure country like Takigakure certainly could. However, Naruto didn't see an honest and law-abiding leader like Shibuki doing something so underhanded unless it was absolutely necessary. After a lengthy discussion over yawn-inducing topics like trade regulations, border control and migratory policies, Naruto and his team were finally excused from the meetings. The ninja showing them to their rooms were friendly enough. They appeared to be more amenable than usual because the Konoha delegates were also shinobi, as opposed to the usual civilian diplomats. Naruto took the downtime as an opportunity to go out and scope out the village, get a better feel of the people and state of things. It was a far cry from Konoha, that was for sure. It was no bigger than Tenzaku Town, if he was to compare the two. Of course, Tenzaku Town was predominantly civilian merchants, travelers and traders. Takigakure was almost entirely ninja. Even the shopkeepers he spoke with as he perused the only market in town were former shinobi. More conversation confirmed what he had assumed upon entry. As a small village made up of so many ninja, children were a minority. He saw a few now that he had wandered around a bit, but not nearly as many as in Konoha. Their academy was small, no more than a dozen throughout all age groups. Further conversation revealed there were 3 or 4 genin in the village, but they were all considered too new to even think about entering the Chunin exams. He didn't dare yet ask over the village's Jinchuriki, unsure of how the inhabitants would take that line of questioning. As it turned out, he didn't even have to. Towards the end of his exploration, he noticed a poorly concealed chakra signature tailing him around the village. He didn't need Kyubi to confirm the unique energy as the aura of a Jinchuriki, it was easy to tell. Not to mention he caught a glimpse of bright mint green hair out of the corner of his eye, not used to sneaking around, then. He took a quick stop at a ramen counter for some dinner, before eventually deciding he may as well confront his follower now. If all went as planned, they might even be able to leave before schedule. He stopped in the middle of a clearing past a line of trees, well-worn and obviously used as a training area. The tree trunks had telltale skid marks from kunai, and there were holes in the ground where wooden dummies stood. He stood forlornly for a moment, wondering if he should attempt the pretense of training. In the end he thought that was probably unnecessary, given the circumstances. You know, he spoke, idly, for a ninja you're not very stealthy. There was a rustling from the bushes, as if the person sitting inside it took serious offense to this, but was trying not to reveal themselves. Naruto turned to the bush in question, giving it a nonplussed look. I know you're there, you know. There's really no point in hiding. As if on cue, a bright teal-haired head burst out of the foliage, leaves sticking every which way in her hair. She pointed at him, rather rudely. Unknown ninja. Who are you? Why have you come here? Speak now, or she faltered slightly when she was unable to come up with an adequate threat. Well, whatever. You know what I mean. Naruto smiled thinly, amused. I guess so. He shrugged then, tapping his forehead. Are you blind? I'm from Konohagakure. I am part of the delegation that came in earlier. It was a spectacle that was impossible to miss in this small town. Oh. She said, lamely, lowering her finger. Yeah. Naruto agreed, flatly. Well, what were you doing in the village then? She countered after a beat, folding her arms. All the other Konoha nin are in the main palace. So am I. Naruto replied easily. But I wanted to look around some. That's not a crime, is it? I suppose not. She sniffed. But it is suspicious. He laughed. I just wanted ramen. She narrowed her eyes at him, studying him closely. He wasn't entirely sure what to make of her. I'm Naruto, by the way. He smiled disarmingly. Who are you? She watched him warily for another second, before finally dropping her arms and stepping out of the bush. I'm Fu. I'm a Takigakure ninja. I can see that. Naruto noted in good humor, taking note of her attire and her headband. Well, it was nice to meet you, Fu. I should probably be heading back now. Fu nodded, hesitantly. Oh. You too. Naruto decided to take a page out of Yamato's book and play a game of patience. There was no point trying to force his way into a friendship with Fu, just to get her to come with him. And anyway, he had already decided that he wanted to genuinely be friends with her, and he didn't want to ruin that by trying too hard. The second day in Takigakure brought along a lot of long talks and boring meetings. At least he had Tawa and Koga next to him in silent commiseration. The three of them were just not cut out for this sort of work, leaving all the talking to Yamato or Yugao. Tawa and Koga were a bit of a lost cause, but Naruto was truly interested in learning negotiations, despite how boring he found it after a few hours. Diplomacy was an integral part of being a leader, and one he had overlooked often in his youth. It had never occurred to him that the majority of the Hokage's job was intervillage relations. The Sandaime had been no great fan of it, tending to avoid having to deal with other villages any more than necessary. From what he'd heard from the Anbu and other adults that had been through both his regime and the Yondaimes, he had been a lot more active in intervillage affairs in his youth, but time and incidents had made him grow wary of it. Tsunade's council was a lot more open in that regard, angling for more alliances and trade agreements with other countries, a fact remarked upon by the Takigakure delegation. "I'll agree that by nature hidden villages are isolationist," Yamato had said on the topic. "And that village autonomy is something to be respected. But Konoha has long since been involved in widespread trade with other countries, so it's no surprise Godame-sama wants to open up some of those old connections." Naruto couldn't care less about import and export taxes, but he had to admit he was learning a lot. He was a bit abashed to realize he had disregarded and underestimated the power of diplomacy in the face of brute strength and power. Once the talks convened for the day, he returned to the training grounds he had found the day before. It would be good to get out all his pent-up energy from sitting around all day, and he figured he may as well try to make more headway on his own mission while he had the time. If only his was as straightforward as Yamato's. He wasted time sparring with Hokage Bunshin, wondering if Fu would actually return, or if he'd have to go looking for her this time. It wasn't the most interesting or investing way to pass the time, but he had nothing else to do but wait around and hit half-heartedly at a mirror of himself. Fortunately, the girl didn't keep him waiting for long. He had just about gotten bored enough to start throwing around fireballs at an army of clones just to watch them flail around when he felt a flicker of distinct chakra lighting up behind him. Naruto pretended as if he didn't notice, continuing on with his unfair torture of his clones, much to their vocal protest. She circled around the training ground, doing a better job of keeping out of sight this time. The treatment sort of made him feel like when stingy cats stare at you from a distance before eventually coming up to sniff your hand. He wondered what it would take to get her to approach. It's not as if he could just hold out his hand with a can of tuna or something. He figured out her catnip eventually. All it took was the super explosion from a massive Rasengan colliding with his clones to have her come running out from her hiding spot. That was so cool. She cried, practically sprinting up to him. He would have been amused if he wasn't so relieved. "Thanks," he said instead, not really sure how else to respond to that. "Like, literally the coolest jutsu I've ever seen," she exclaimed breathlessly. Naruto wondered if that was an exaggeration, or if it really was the most unique jutsu she'd seen so far. The Rasengan was pretty flashy, if he was being honest with himself, and it was pretty unique. Still, he didn't know how to respond to that either. Can you teach me how to do that?" Fu interrupted him. "I've never seen a jutsu like that before." He actually couldn't believe his luck right now. You want me to teach you?" he repeated, dumbfounded. "Yeah," she replied without missing a beat. "How do you do it? Is it some kind of wind jutsu?" Naruto blinked a few times, still grappling with the sheer dumb luck in his life right now. "Sure, yeah. Wind jutsu." Fu nodded eagerly. "I know a couple wind jutsu, nothing fancy though." Naruto remained silent for a moment, taking stock of the situation. "Nothing fancy, huh?" he said finally, smirking. "Well, the Rasengan is pretty fancy. Are you sure you have what it takes?" Her eyes sparkled with the challenge. "You bet." He tapped his chin exaggeratedly, making a non-committal noise. "You're sure?" Fu scowled. "You better not be underestimating me just because I'm a genin. I would never." He grinned roguishly. Fu eyed him skeptically. Naruto had never actually taught anyone before, so it probably shouldn't have come as a surprise that he found himself emulating his own teachers. "Alright, I'll make you a deal," he announced. "Meet me here tomorrow, same time, and I'll have a test for you. If you pass, I'll teach you the Rasengan and anything else you want." Fu nodded with enthusiasm. "Okay." The next day, he produced 2 bells out of his pocket. Fu looked at him blankly. "What is this?" she asked, at length. "The bell test." Naruto replied with a grin. The rules are pretty simple, you just have to find a way to take these from me. 1 is fine, 2 is better. How does that sound? Fu's gaze moved from the bells in his hand to him, a skeptical expression clouding her features. That's it? She asked, incredulously. That's it. Naruto affirmed. Her brows knit with concentration, as her gaze once again turned to the bells. Kakashi had used the test as a means to not only evaluate them, but coax them into working together as a team. Since Naruto was only training Fu, he decided to use it as an exercise to judge not only her skills as a shinobi, but also her ingenuity. He was going to train her for the Chunin exams regardless of how this test turned out, but he didn't want to make it easy for her. Predictably, she lunged straight at him. Ha! She cried in triumph as she tackled him to the ground. Her triumph turned to surprise when the Naruto beneath her turned out to be a log. Fu scowled, leaping back up and scanning the clearing. Naruto had disappeared. The blonde watched her curse liberally from his spot high up in the trees, watching closely to see how good of a tracker she was. He had sent out at least a dozen Kage Bunshin to run around in the forest as distraction. He wondered which one she would pick first. He had specifically made one of the Bunshin obvious and easy to follow, running through branches and leaving smudged footprints as he went. The majority were at least doing a passable job of covering their tracks. And 2 of them were using every Anbu tactic he knew. Naruto crouched on his branch, finding himself actually excited to see which path she chose. Would she start by observing the ground for tracks? Did she have some way of following scents or chakra signatures? Or maybe she could. Naruto swallowed a yelp of surprise as his tree shuddered alarmingly, before violently veering backwards. He used a quick shunshin to transfer to another tree, surprised to see the large pine he had just inhabited collapse to the ground with a thud and a climactic cloud of dust and startled birds. Okay, so that was pretty impressive, he decided. She probably has some way of sensing my Jinchuriki signature, Naruto thought, using another shunshin to put more distance between them. He certainly hadn't expected that, however there was no other explanation. He had made certain to mask his chakra signature, scent, and presence. Not surprising, the Hachibi also exhibited some signs of intrinsic awareness to other tailed beasts. Kyubi agreed, surprisingly the blonde. Oh, finally decided to show up, eh? Naruto greeted Drilly. You seem to be doing an adequate job handling the situation yourself. Kurama replied, which was his way of saying he would prefer Naruto handle this himself. For someone so good at it, Kyubi had a real adversity to teaching people for some reason. Bringing his attention again to the situation at hand, Naruto pondered alternatives to his current predicament. He had learned from B that the Hachibi could also consciously sense the other tailed beasts. Certainly not with as much clarity as Kyubi, but in close enough proximity B could track him easily. The point Naruto had learned just to forego hiding away or attempting to get the drop on B with anything else but pure speed. He would have to train with Fu some more before he could discern how far her radius went, but for now it was same to assume it was around the same as B's. He darted around the forest, using his own senses to track her location. She had followed his lead and dropped a few clones into the forest, and for now they were darting about on the trail of his own. The real Fu was on his tail, the bright flame of Jinchuriki chakra tingling from behind him. Naruto smirked to himself, slowing down. She was pretty good. Definitely better than he had been as a genin. He skidded to a halt in the shadow of 2 pines, not in the least bit tired out but feigning as if he was out of breath. He slumped over dramatically, wiping at his brow as if to clear sweat from his forehead. It took her a couple seconds to catch up. Just as he had planned, she swung down from the trees to tackle the hunched-over figure. The Naruto underneath her blew up in smoke, turning into a log as it dropped to the ground underneath her weight. The real Naruto dropped down from the branch above, surprising the genin on the ground. Fu yelped unceremoniously as he grabbed her by the ankles and dropped her into the ground, a move he shamelessly borrowed from Kakashi. She gave a cry of alarm as he pulled her down, turning in his grip to swipe at him. At first he had thought it was just a futile attempt to get away from him, but it became obvious she had a plan in mind when a cloud of smoke erupted in front of him. He let go of her immediately, reeling backwards to get away from it. He thought it was ninja smoke, used to surprise him, but when he used quick jutsu to clear the air it still lingered. And then he blinked, and the whole world disappeared. "Whoa," he said belatedly, staggering backwards. He rubbed his eyes, but everything was still completely black. If he couldn't feel himself blinking, he would assume his eyes were still closed. His second reaction was to send out a pulse of chakra to dispel any genjutsu. To his shock the blindness remained. Was he actually blinded? "This is the Komiai's power," Kyubi growled lowly, surprising him. "Her tailed beast?" "Yes." So they were working together, then? He wondered what her relationship with her tenant was. Okay. Well, how do he may lack sight, but his other senses were in perfect working order. He could hear the rustling behind him, having enough time to duck under a swinging kick. He could feel the air current as she landed in front of him, sidestepping a punch that barely grazed his cheek, and throwing his guard up for her follow-up punch. He was holding his own for now, but he was literally fighting blind here. He dodged out of the way of most of her taijutsu, the kata not particularly difficult or original enough to catch him truly off guard. There was a rhythm to her swirling kicks and jabs, familiar enough for him to block or get out of the way, but not enough to stop defending and start attacking. He felt the air rush past him, he blocked the first kick, but the second roundhouse caught him right in the face. Naruto stumbled backwards, cursing under his breath. Well, she certainly knew how to enhance her strikes with chakra, that's for sure. Fu giggled. "Not so easy now, huh? It's kinda hard trying to fight without your eyes, isn't it?" He wiped his mouth, where he was pretty sure he'd cut his lip. "Are you suggesting that you can only beat me if I'm incapacitated?" He retorted with a smirk, straightening up. Fu gritted her teeth, and Naruto didn't have to see to know she was scowling. The genin grunted, unwilling to admit that he might be right. It simply wasn't in her nature to admit defeat, or inadequacy of any kind, even in the face of this jounin Anbu. Especially in the face of this one. Naruto couldn't be all that much older than her, and yet he was already a respected and accomplished ninja. She had this stupid urge to prove herself to him, one she knew was childish. This didn't stop her from wanting to anyway to make him stop and look at her. She lunged at him again, withdrawing a kunai from her pocket. But she was 1 second too slow. With a flare of chakra, the murky, clouded color of the Komiai's dust over Naruto's eyes was burned away by a dojutsu she'd never seen before. Fu gasped as he caught her strike, before launching her upwards with a knee to her stomach, knocking the breath out of her as she went flying. She landed a couple feet away, grunting as she hit the ground. She rolled over back onto her feet almost immediately, crouched low as she scrutinized him with shock and trepidation. No one had ever broken out of the Komiai's blinding powder before. The effects weren't permanent, but they could stick around for a few hours. And with the perfect hit she'd landed on Naruto's face she would have expected at least half a day. But the blonde was staring back at her with complete focus, his eyes a peculiar shade of crimson, with an annulation of ring spreading from his pupil. Those eyes definitely hadn't been there before. She only had a moment to stare at them in amazement, before the blonde vaulted towards her, sword unsheathed. Fu's eyes widened in alarm, her feet moving as her mind froze, throwing her out of the way. She grappled with her pack strapped to her leg, fishing out another kunai as she swallowed thickly. While her taijutsu was polished, she couldn't say the same for her kenjutsu. And it was clear within a few seconds of sparring him that Naruto was leagues ahead of her with his mastery of the blade. Despite the fact that she was sorely losing, having to revert to physically dodging out of the way and backtracking to put some more space between them, this was only endearing him more to her. Watching him with a sword was so impressive, he never seemed to miss a single step. Fu shook her head with a frown. If she sat here all day marveling over his form, she was never going to find a way to get that bell, and then Naruto wouldn't teach her at all. She gave a grunt as the breath was knocked out of her, Naruto flipping her right over and onto the ground. In another second her hands and legs were tied together, despite her attempts to wiggle out of his grip. Her eyes shot open when she heard his footsteps moving away from her, struggling in her bonds. "Hey!" she shouted. "Where are you going?" The leisurely pace stopped. "Oh, well, it's getting kind of late. I think I'm gonna hit the hay." Fu sputtered wildly. "You're just going to leave me here?" She gasped. "What about the test?" "Yeah, that. You've got until the day before I leave to try and take them from me, so don't worry about it. Suffice to say you failed today, but there's already tomorrow." Fu gaped. "I failed? Well, what else would you call this?" was the sardonic response. "Fine, whatever." Fu groused. "Just get me out of these things." Naruto laughed, the footsteps continuing again. "I'm sure you'll figure out how to get out of those. Eventually." Her head shot up in alarm as she wiggled around in the dirt to try and face him. Wait. What do you mean by that?" "Hey! Get back here. You can't just leave me like this. You jerk!" she yelled at the top of her lungs. He only continued to laugh. He wasn't sure what he had expected from his meeting with the other Jinchuriki. Someone a lot like him, really. Someone like Garaculated, alone, somewhat unhinged. Failing that, he expected someone more along the lines of Yujito. Quiet, taciturn, hardened by life. In reality, his first expectation might have been right. A little too right. Fu was just like a Jinchuriki, one he knew very well. In fact, Fu was the spitting image of Naruto himself, that was to say, loud, obnoxious, arrogant and stubborn. Genin Naruto and Genin Fu could have been siblings for all they resembled each other in personality. He knew what this was about. Fu wanted needed to prove herself. A large and powerful hidden village like Konohagakure sends representatives to Takigakure. The envoy includes bingo book level Anbu operatives, highlights including Captain Yamato and the nine-tailed Jinchuriki, Uzumaki Naruto. They're the talk of the town in a small village like this, and it's not all that long until Fu hears about them. It's not a stretch to assume she's comparing herself to him. They're both Jinchuriki, both about the same age. Considering her relatively sheltered existence in this small village, she's probably always been the strongest in her generation. To have another Jinchuriki come in here, with some illustrious title from some illustrious village. Naruto sighed, hopefully this wouldn't cloud her judgment for too long. He really wanted to see just what kind of potential she had. The talks continued. Naruto had his first speaking part since they arrived, trying to casually persuade Shibuki into letting Fu come back with them. Or at the very least, laying the groundwork to hopefully make him more amenable to the idea later on. "I just don't see why Akatsuki is our problem," Shibuki was in the middle of saying. The conversation had once more returned to the matter, the topic left alone after a few brief remarks on it on the first day. It seems like an issue best left to the larger hidden villages, who have the resources to deal with this sort of thing. Despite the fact that the majority of our citizens are shinobi, that's still a small portion size in comparison to, say, Konoha or Kyumo. That may be so, but Akatsuki is everyone's issue, not just an issue best left to those who can afford to fight them. Yamato countered. Obviously your contributions will be relative. No one expects Takigakure to have as many shinobi in the coalition as a Konohagakure or Kyumogakure. Shibuki made a non-committal noise. It just seems like a bit of a stretch to me. It's preemptive, yes. Yamato agreed. But Tsunade-sama and A-sama have agreed that preventative measures are better than reactive. especially considering the losses that could occur. Well, now we've really come around to the issue. One of Shibuki's advisors interrupted. Their presence was most unwelcome as far as Naruto was concerned. Shibuki had went from a mild-mannered and pleasant individual into some stoic and unfriendly version of himself the moment they walked in. Naruto didn't know what sort of situation was going on behind the scenes, but he could infer it wasn't an amicable one. The other one nodded. Yes, exactly. Just what losses are you referring to? Fighting forces? Land? Economic prosperity? You stated earlier that they didn't appear to have any monetary or political influences, so what are they after? Akatsuki doesn't want your land or your money, Naruto found himself interrupting. The entire party turned to look at him, and he pushed aside a trill of nervousness to continue on. An attack from them could lead to casualties, but that's not their main intention. Shibuki was scrutinizing him closely, as if he hadn't even noticed Naruto was there until now. Is this supposed to sway me somehow? His brow rose in rhetoric. What exactly is their danger, otherwise? Your Jinchuriki. Naruto replied, flatly. Whatever amusement the Takigakure Kage felt disappeared at that, his eyes narrowing. What? They're after the Jinchuriki. All of them including Fu. Steal our Jinchuriki? The advisor to his left hissed. What madness is this? They would dare? Cried the other. For what purpose? Shibuki spoke over them both. No one really knows. Naruto replied carefully, unwilling to relay Kyuubi's suspicions without any concrete proof. But whatever they do to them involves the death of the Jinchuriki, and the capture of the beast. Shibuki looked very pale at the thought, gaze lowering to the table as he pursed his lips in thought. The reason why Kumogakure and Konohagakure are at the forefront of this alliance is because they have already suffered an attack by Akatsuki. Naruto continued. Fortunately the hosts myself and Ni Yujita were able to escape capture, but it was a close call. We don't intend to let Akatsuki have another chance. His eyes snapped back to Naruto. One of his advisors sucked in a breath. You're the Konohagakure Jinchuriki? A part of Naruto was surprised that they were so surprised. But then he realized he hadn't actually told anyone, not even Fu, although he assumed she'd figured that out. Belatedly he wondered if he wasn't supposed to tell them that. This is Uzumaki Naruto. If Yamato was annoyed with him for introducing himself, nothing showed on his features. And yes, he is also the Konohagakure Jinchuriki. Shibuki looked shaken. Akatsuki tried to take you as well? Naruto was about to answer, but Yugao beat him to it. They attempted multiple times. He revealed. But luckily Naruto is capable of handling his own. Actually, I'm lucky that I have people looking out for me. Naruto amended quickly. I wasn't alone during any of these attacks, and I was lucky that there were people who were willing to help me, even risk their lives for me. He added, thinking of the Jounin who had intercepted Kisame and Itachi when they had went to Konoha in search of him. Fortunately Yamato seemed to pick up on where he was going with this, nodding slightly. Naruto is correct, he had a lot of support which proved to be invaluable. We cannot stand alone in this. They've already taken advantage of our fractured alliance, pitting enemies against each other for their own gain. The Takigakure leader closed his eyes, taking a breath. I agree that the matter requires serious attention. He said, solemnly. As Takigakure is one of the hidden villages that has a Jinchuriki in residence, we must act with caution. One of his advisors visibly startled. Shibuki-sama, whatever resources you need from us, you will have them. He stated with great finality, much to irritation of the two men sitting beside him. Yamato simply inclined his head. Thank you. Shibuki looked grim, but determined. We can work out the particulars tomorrow, an excellent idea, agreed the old man to his left. Yes, yes, the hour grows late, perhaps we should retire for the evening? The other segued smoothly, smiling thinly. Yamato took the subtle dismissal for what it was, meeting the smile with a cheery one of his own. Of course. I'm not sure about all of you, but I find myself quite famished. Shibuki-sama, I heard Takigakure was famous for their rice noodles? Perhaps you could recommend us a place? Fu scowled darkly at nothing in particular, feeling sorry for herself and then feeling annoyed because she was feeling sorry for herself. She had once again failed to get the bell from Naruto. Today was the last day to try. She had underestimated him, somehow, even knowing he was a Jinchuriki, and knowing he was a Black Ops. He hadn't disclosed either of those two facts to her, but she could gather information just as well as any other shinobi. First of all, the only party of Konohanin to come in was a party of Anbu members, so it was easy to figure out what Naruto's rank was. As for his status as a Jinchuriki, she had the Chome to help out with that. She might not appear stealthy at first glance, but that was all part of her ruse. The Komiai's natural powers were centered around illusions and invisibility, something Fu had taken to heart. But even if she knew all this stuff about him, he still came out of it with the upper hand. She rubbed furiously at her eyes. Now was not the time to feel dejected. She should be coming up with another plan, not sitting around moping. Good ninja didn't give up, they kept trying until they found something that worked. She'd tried a lot of brilliant ideas out on Naruto, but none of them came even close to working. The blonde had a larger repertoire of jutsu than she did, had more precision with his chakra, had better swordsmanship, and taijutsu, and had a few tricks up his sleeves like that dojutsu of his. Okay, so there were a lot of reasons why even her ingenious ideas fell short. But there had to be something else. He had to have a weakness somewhere. Fu pondered this as she walked home, scuffed up with dirt from her latest and final attempt to nab a bell from the blonde Black Ops, but no longer defeated in the least. Well, for one thing, she did have somewhat of an advantage now. The test was technically over, so Naruto probably thought she had given up. Not to mention at this point he must assume he knew her strengths and weaknesses pretty well, so if she played her cards right he might just underestimate her. Fu tapped her chin thoughtfully. Well, she did have one more skill up her sleeve. One she considered to be her best. And one she hadn't had the opportunity to show off yet. But that might just work in her favor at this point. Fu grinned. Still, it was a long shot, but it could work. But in order for that to happen she had to gather information. Fortunately the Konoha party had one more day of negotiations, set to leave at sundown tomorrow. That was plenty of time for some good old reconnaissance. Naruto eyed himself in the mirror, wary and alarmed. He couldn't remember the last time he had seen his strange Sharingan evolution, but it certainly hadn't looked like this. The first time it had manifested, all those months ago during the Chunin exam invasion, he remembered staring at himself in a similar position and scrutinizing the familiar red eyes and black tomo. It had looked like Sasuke's red iris with a ring about halfway from the edge of his eye to the pupil, 3 tomo strung around it. By the time he had been hunting for Tsunade, it had emerged anew. There were more rings, with more tomo. He hadn't thought it cause for serious concern, because at that point Kyubi had revealed to him that his Jujutsu was not actually a Sharingan, but some kind of predecessor to it. And it had still looked similar enough to its original form that it hadn't really worried him that, and everything still seemed to be in working order. But it was really starting to worry him. Naruto pursed his lips, leaning closer to the mirror and widening his eyes. There were 3 rings now, 3 tomo on each. Combined with his pupil, there appeared to be 10. He blinked slowly, observing as his pupil dilated as it adjusted to the light. As it grew the space between the rings thinned, when it contracted again the spaces evened out. When his eyes first opened the tomo circled quickly, almost too fast to track, before eventually slowing down as he kept them open. The process was oddly hypnotizing. He had no idea how long he stood there, watching himself blink repeatedly, but it was long enough to lose himself in a daze. He was thrown clean out of it by a rapt knock on the bathroom door, startling him enough for him to flail backwards and land sprawled on the toilet seat. "Do you plan on staying in there all day?" came a muffled voice from the other side of the door. "Just saying, I tried to be courteous and wait a couple minutes, but dude, it's been way more than a couple minutes." "What? Wait, that's not." He spluttered quickly. "I was just, I don't even want to know." Tawa deadpanned. "But we're leaving in 10 minutes. Naruto smacked a hand to his face in horror, closing his eyes with an expression of pure mortification. "It's not, I don't want to know." Tawa repeated flatly, before his footsteps marched their way out of Naruto's hotel room. Naruto sighed, scrubbing the hand down his face. Well, at the very least he would never guess what Naruto was actually doing. When he sat up again his eyes were back to normal, a clear, sparkling blue. So normal it was as if he had dreamed that Sharingan up. He squinted at himself in the mirror, wondering how to conjure it up. It always just seemed to happen. He had to admit, thus far the timing had always been impeccable, but all the same he would prefer to be able to access it on command. Whenever he was in combat, or whenever his senses were on high alert, it always seemed to manifest exactly when he needed it to. But otherwise it was like attempting to rouse Kyuubi when he didn't want to be bothered, utterly impossible. The blonde let out a huff of air, unlocking the bathroom door and stepping back into his hotel room. 10 minutes was probably a perfect amount of time to throw all of his stuff into his bag and pray he didn't forget anything important. The last day of negotiations had actually taken more out of him than any sparring with Fu could have done. On that note, he should probably start hunting down Fu, to initiate his plan to get her to come back with them to Konoha. She'd failed the bell test all 3 days, which was something he'd struggled a bit with. Should he go easy on her the last day so she would pass and become his student? Or would that end up being detrimental? In the end he decided not to go easy on her at all, and despite her best efforts, which truly were quite extraordinary, she hadn't managed to get either bell. At any rate, this just meant that Naruto had to seek her out and propose his solution. He would teach her if she came with him back to Konoha. After that he would have to find a way to convince Shibuki to agree, but he was betting on Fu to do that. The Takigakure leader had already agreed to help however he could with Akatsuki, mainly just to provide backup if needed and to report any suspicious activity within their borders. Their real sacrifice to the cause would be letting go of their precious Jinchuriki, and that was still up in the air. There was a polite knock on the door. "Naruto?" He answered vaguely, distracted by hauling all of his clothes out of the drawers. Yugao opened the door a peek. "Don't even say it," Naruto said flatly, before he had to put up with it. The last thing he wanted to hear was the talk, attempted by an uncomfortable but determined to do the subject justice Yugao. "Tawa is a fucking liar." "What was he lying about?" she asked as she walked in. Oh. Maybe Tawa hadn't went gushing to the rest of the team after all. That would be rather surprising of the other Anbu. Finding material to tease Naruto with was practically his favorite pastime, and Naruto had just handed him the gold mine. "About you know what, never mind," he finished shortly, narrowing his gaze around the room for the missing sock to this pair. "It had to be around here somewhere." "It's nothing, really." He whirled around fast enough to give himself whiplash, acting on instinct. His hand sprung out to catch her by the wrist, where she was reaching for his belt. His eyes widened. Not his belt, but his other hand snapped to her throat, with enough chakra to cause the henge to dispel. Fu blinked up at him, a sheepish grin to her face. "Gotcha," she croaked, around his vice-like grip. Naruto immediately released her at that, stunned into immobility. She landed back unsteadily on her feet, rubbing her throat with a grimace. Still, she was grinning triumphantly. Naruto simply stared down at her, still shocked. He had been distracted, yes, but all the same that was a great henge. She must really have a talent for it, he thought belatedly. It took a lot to be able to control one's chakra signature to perfectly emulate someone else's like that. And it took a very observant shinobi to mimic the behavior of another. He would have noticed something off with Yugao otherwise. Wow! Naruto said at length, still in awe. That was a phenomenal henge. Fu beamed at him. Thank you. He recovered himself after a beat. Although you know, your deadline was yesterday. Fu immediately deflated. I know. She replied, glumly. But I couldn't let you leave thinking you had beat me. Naruto raised a brow. Fu pursed her lips. Well and... She looked away. And I had something I wanted to ask you. He leaned back, very interested in where this was going. Yeah? She scuffed the floor with her foot, eyes downcast. I still want to learn the Rasengan. I'm leaving today, you know. He reminded her gently. 10 minutes, yeah, I know. She reminded him cheekily, grinning with amusement at his sudden scowl. Her good humor flattened out again, returning her to her maudlin and discomfited state. Well, it was just. I mean, I was thinking. Yes? He prodded lightly. Her eyes shot up to meet his. Could I come with you? Back to Konoha? Please. I've always wanted to go, and Shibuki said I could even though he wasn't too happy about it, and I promise I won't get in the way or anything, and okay, Naruto cut her off hastily, before she could really get on a roll. You can, okay? It's fine. I'll train really hard and listen to everything you say, and I'll be a really good student, and she cut herself off with all the bluntness of a solid brick wall. Wait. Really? Yes, really. Naruto returned, amused. Fu blinked her large vermilion eyes repeatedly. Really? She echoed. Yes. Naruto said, amused. That's it? Just like that? Well, to be honest, I was hoping you'd say that. Naruto shrugged. Fu's mouth opened in shock. You were? Well, yeah. If it's all right with you, I wanted to train you for the Chunin exams. It's part of the reason we're here, actually. He revealed with a sunny smile. Fu's mouth dropped even further. What? She pointed at him wildly. But you the Rasengan and the test, this whole time? She yelled at him accusingly. I thought it would be better if you came to the decision on your own. Naruto answered cheerfully. It wasn't entirely a lie. But all the same, Naruto couldn't have predicted a better outcome if he'd tried. This was perfect. She threw the bell at him. You suck. She declared dramatically. Do you have any idea what I had to go through to get Shibuki to say yes to this? I had to connive him with fake tears, and yelling, and threatening, and all sorts of things. And this whole time you were going to do it anyway? You would have had to convince him either way, Naruto pointed out with a laugh. At least this way it was genuine. To be honest, I would have told you earlier if I thought you were a good enough actor to pull it off. He paused. Although considering how you fooled me with that henge, maybe you could have. Fu's brow twitched. I can't believe you. She fumed. This whole time I was sitting here freaking out over this damn test, and it was all a fake to begin with. Hey now, Naruto chided lightly, plopping backwards to sit on his bed. Just because it was fake doesn't mean it was meaningless. It was a good experience for you and a good opportunity to assess you for me. She was still pouting, but unwillingly bit out, I guess. She looked up at him. But why did you let me think I'd failed? Well, you did fail. Naruto pointed out, to her annoyance. But my plan was to ask you to come with me anyway. Fu tilted her head curiously. But how did you know I would say yes? Psychoanalyzing. Naruto replied with a grin. Anyway, I figured the most difficult part would be to convince your Kage to let you go, but I could tell from the meetings that despite his desire to keep you close by, he wants you to grow and succeed first and foremost. And going to Konoha would be the best way to do it. Fu realized. Yep. Naruto grinned wider. It's great when things work out so well, huh? Maybe for you. Fu made to swipe at him angrily. He laughed and ducked out of the way. I was really worried. But in spite of her anger, Fu could privately admit his plan had actually helped her to think outside the box. She would have never come up with the idea of turning herself into one of his teammates to steal his bells. She would have just been thinking of ways to beat him in combat, even though it was clear that wasn't working. Would you have come up with your plan if you hadn't been worried? Naruto turned around, in line with her current train of thought. Fu blew a raspberry. I guess not. Naruto smiled at her, before shaking his head fondly and getting up off the bed, continuing his hunt for his missing socks. Well anyway, why don't you tell me how you managed such a perfect henge? I know ninja who are considered experts on them that can't even get a henge that close. Fu smirked. Well, you see, the first step is to study your subject with the eye of an artist. Naruto stood beside the rest of the Jounin sensei, finding himself stunned into silent disbelief. He was not alone in his shock, either. Just about every other Jounin in here was looking at Tsunade with varying expressions of incredulity or disbelief. He had been summoned to the Hokage's office a few hours after he'd arrived home from Takigakure, only to find the room already crowded with the familiar faces of the other Jounin sensei, and a few new sensei he hadn't been introduced to yet. Kakashi had given him a friendly wave, and Ebisu had grinned at him. Everyone else just looked surprised and bewildered by his presence. The trip back had been slower than usual with the addition of Fu, who had to be taught how to regulate her chakra for long-distance fast travel. Despite taking to him like a duck to water, she seemed skittish and shy in the face of his team. He wasn't sure why, his rank hadn't bothered her before. But maybe that was due to their shared status as Jinchuriki and similarity in age. It hadn't been awkward or anything, but he had found it harder to get her to open up to him because of it, and he wanted to use the time with just the two of them to solidify their friendship, before Tsunade threw two other genin into the mix. He needn't have worried though, because it appeared he would be spending a lot of time with Fu, because she was his new housemate. She swore up and down it was only temporary. Shibuki had given her enough money to start, and soon enough she'd be making her own money through missions and the like. It was only until she could find a place herself, and Naruto felt a little bad for the young girl who was all alone in a brand new city 10 times bigger than her own, so he let her stay. She hadn't even had time yet to explore the city fully, let alone start looking for places to live. With Fu taken care of, at least for the time being, his summons to the Hokage's office came with good timing. He was eager to find out who his other two students would be. But in hindsight, Naruto didn't know what he had been expecting. Some academy squirts, probably. It hadn't occurred to him that the genin he had grown up with and gone to school with for the majority of their lives, the ones who hadn't passed the exams, would obviously be the genin who were being shuffled around. Hokage-sama, forgive me if I am speaking out of turn. Guy coughed delicately. But do you truly think it wise to resort the teams in such a manner? Kurenai's ruby gaze slid from her fellow Jounin sensei to her Hokage. I have to agree with him, Hokage-sama. These teams have been together for over a year now. They've begun to gain traction and they've had a long time to work on their teamwork, which is an integral part of being a shinobi. I understand that some amount of shifting around is necessary due to the uneven numbers, Asuma added. But this is breaking up a foundation that has taken months to solidify. Tsunade stared them all down with an inscrutable expression. I acknowledge your complaints, she began, solemnly. And I agree they all have merit. The office was silent as they all waited for the other shoe to drop. But I have to say, these past exams were awful. Konoha's teams in particular performed abysmally in comparison to the other countries, and a lot of that has to do with our approach to teams. Well, Tsunade wasn't mincing words today. Kurenai looked like she had something to say, but Tsunade raised her hand against the interruption. Look, emphasis on teamwork is a good thing. Teams are important. Loyalty is important. Our teams were formed to cover the strengths and weaknesses of individual genin, which is a good thing. But genin are passed on individual merit only. Shinobi are valued on individual merit only. She waved a file in the air. From this far away Naruto could make out an indistinct photo attached and some kind of data chart. And what happens is we start to get genin with appallingly distorted strengths and weaknesses. Their strengths get stronger, and their weaknesses become glaringly apparent when they're removed from their team. There's a reason why out of the half-dozen teams from Konoha to participate, only one genin was picked. Naruto and Sasuke being exceptions. Naruto because he had been promoted well before the exams, and Sasuke because of necessity. At this, whatever disagreements any of them might have had died a still death. Well, apparently not all disagreements. To Naruto's surprise, it was actually Kakashi who spoke up. Hokage-sama makes valid points, but with all due respect I have to disagree. Relying on others is a necessary skill to learn and a difficult thing for shinobi to acknowledge, and that problem is only exacerbated by the current system. Despite the fact shinobi are valued on their individual skills, they are still always put on teams. Naruto's lips thinned into a terse line, an expression of discomfort shared by the others. They both made good points. Agreed, Tsunade returned shortly. But we're not looking long-term here. Despite starting in three-man teams, genin are judged on individual merit. Chunin are judged on teamwork. And yet, look at our system, genin are forced onto teams, while chunin are often taken under the wing of a single mentor. She sighed. If it was up to me I'd change the whole damn system, but it's not, so we'll just have to make do. I'm restructuring the teams because they've gotten complacent. Yes, teamwork is important, but as you all know it's very rare to stay on one team exclusively for a ninja's entire career. And right now our emphasis on teams rather than individuals is producing a stunning lack of productivity and advancement. As of now, our priority is to build strong, able shinobi. I want well-rounded genin to become well-rounded chunin who will have a lot to bring to the table no matter what team they're with. Do I make myself clear? It is important that they cooperate and work well together, but it is just as important that they are competent and capable as individuals as well. At the end of the day, Tsunade was Hokage. As far as the ninja population was concerned, her word was law. So despite whatever begrudging complaints any of them had, Tsunade's decision remained steadfast. No one was all that enthused about it though, Naruto included. The Hokage had asked him to stay behind after dismissing the rest of the Jounin sensei, leaving Naruto alone in stunned silence, holding the file on his new students. In comparison to the other Jounin, Naruto had been decidedly without opinion. He understood the merits of all the arguments presented, and because this was his first time with any of the genin he had no real personal preference for some of them over the others. Now though, he definitely had an opinion. Tsunade-sama, he started anxiously, when the room had cleared and he'd had enough time to process this. Don't get me wrong, I agree with what you said and you're the Hokage and all so I'm not going to question it, but are you sure you should be giving this team to me? His other two genin were a pair he knew quite well. One of them couldn't look him in the eye or speak to him without stuttering, and the other one had a disdain for him that was only rivaled by his disdain for his cousin, the cousin he was, incidentally, now on a team with. Tsunade looked up from her paperwork, sparing him an unmoved glance. Is there a problem? Yes, there was a problem. Maybe at some point in his life he would have started shouting at her, but at this point he only rubbed his temples, taking a calming breath. A few, yes, Naruto replied after a beat, composed and collected. First off, these two have wildly different characteristics that are going to be antagonistic and detrimental to the team. Secondly, especially in the case of Hyuga Neji, insubordination is most likely going to be a severe issue. Tsunade tilted her head at him, appraising him with an inscrutable look. Yes, I know. She replied, coolly. Naruto blinked at her. You don't care? Like I said earlier, the prior team formations picked by the Sandaime only served to intensify the issues that were already made apparent in the academy reports. She leaned over her desk. As an example, Hyuga Hinata was already known to be incredibly shy and withdrawn, especially in the face of confrontation. This was a known weakness, and because of this she was put on a team with Inuzuka Kiba and Aburame Shino. Shino is also known to be non-confrontational. And while Kiba is considered more aggressive, and hot-tempered and prone to picking fights, because of the strong matriarchal bonds of the Inuzuka family, he holds a great deal of respect for women and would never intentionally insult or berate Hinata. And of course, Kurenai Yuhi would be an ideal sensei, a competent and strong jounin whose teaching style is gentle and nurturing. Naruto frowned. You're saying that team was formed entirely around Hinata? It wouldn't be the first time a clan heir got preferential treatment like that. Tsunade crossed her arms, making a non-committal noise. But the three combined also make for an excellent tracking team. But what's the point in having three trackers all on one team? The result is a team that is highly skilled in reconnaissance, but aside from what was taught by their clans they lack offensive capabilities. I guess that makes sense, Naruto allowed, scratching the back of his neck. But what about the other teams? The Ino Shikacho team was well-rounded, but already broken up due to Shikamaru's promotion. And for the record, they're a shining example of exactly what I don't want to happen. Yamanaka Ino and Akimichi Chuji grew complacent in their roles, leaving Shikamaru to pick up the slack. The result is Shikamaru being promoted, and the other two staying genin for another year. Unfortunately, if I tried to break up such an infamous team I'd never hear the end of it, so the two are staying together. However, for all their animosity, I think Yamanaka Ino and Haruno Sakura do a lot to better themselves, as rivalries tend to do, which is why I added Sakura to their team. Hopefully by extension this will inspire Chuji to put in more effort, as he won't want to get left behind. Naruto's brow creased. What about Team 7? He almost didn't want to ask, but a part of him was too curious to simply let the subject go. Tsunade was silent for a moment. I'm going to be honest with you, Naruto, your team was probably the most well-balanced of all of them, and it wasn't even intentional. She said seriously, looking him straight in the eye and catching him by surprise. They took the worst-performing student and the best-performing student and hoped they'd even each other out, and threw in the odd man out of the class that had ended up being the last pick due to preferential clan treatment. And then they shoved Kakashi at you all because of the Uchiha. He blinked. Had they really been the most balanced team? It certainly hadn't seemed like it at the time, but he could see her point now. And what she had said about rivalries really resonated with him. He wouldn't have tried as hard as he did if he wasn't constantly measuring himself up to Sasuke. Now for Guy's team, well, Tenten I think will do well on any team. She has an amicable temperament, is hardworking, and gets along well with others. She's an able weapons tactician, and she would have been promoted this year if she filled out her genjutsu and ninjutsu a bit more. I have no intention to separate Guy and Rock Lee, and I don't necessarily mean that in a good way. She gave a loud capitulation, a crease of irritation between her brows. As for Hyuga Neji, quite frankly, I think his temperament is troubling, his unwillingness to work with others is an obstacle, and right now his current team is doing literally nothing to resolve these issues. He thinks his teammates are beneath him, and quite frankly, maybe they are because they do nothing to disprove him and let him get away with that kind of attitude, and he's respectful enough to Guy that Guy lets it slide. There was a knock on the door, Tsunade not missing a beat as she ushered them inside. I know very well that he's a problematic genin to work with. She continued on, as Naruto turned around to see his Anbu team filing in. And I agree, insubordination is going to be a huge issue for you. Honestly, I'm hoping for that. He returned his gaze to her, surprised. You are? Oh yes. She smirked. I'm counting on you to put him in his place. I was going to call a one-on-one meeting with all the teachers later on in the week, but I may as well give you yours now. Hinata's biggest obstacle is her shyness and lack of confidence. From what I can tell, she's actually quite talented, but feels overshadowed and overwhelmed by her family. Niji has the superiority complex of all prodigies, but a matching inferiority complex brought on from his position as a branch member that's worsening the problem. How you chose to deal with them, I leave up to you. And as for Fu, she segued smoothly. You tell me. How did your mission to Takigakure go? Yamato stepped forward. Excellently. Shibuki-sama was a bit hesitant at first, but by the end of it renewed his alliance to us and vouched his full support in whatever capacity in regards to Akatsuki. He glanced at Naruto, who stood to attention, clearing his throat. Fu. Well, that worked itself out nicely, if I'm being honest. But anyway, yeah, she's here. I'm looking forward to teaching her. She's hardworking and willing to learn. I'm not sure how well she'll work together with the other two, but I have no reason to suspect her incapable. Good. Tsunade nodded. Do you have the signed contract? His captain procured it from one of his pockets, handing the scroll to the Hokage. No complications? Yugao handed him another scroll, which he passed on to the Hokage. No. Most of the details are written in my report, but my largest concern revolves around the political climate of Takigakure. Their Kage is new and inexperienced, and his young age makes him a ripe target for exploitation. I see. The Hokage replied pensively, taking both of them. Well, I suppose we'll just have to wait and see. Series ends here. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to share this video with your friends. Guys, make sure to help the author by visiting the link in the description. This is Fox Sage, and I'm signing off.